educate, and empower with TraceyMaxfield.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Engage, Educate, and Empower, a podcast which aims to highlight the social issues, life challenges, and day-to-day problems that our children, teenagers, and young adults around the world experience each and every day. Now, if you've joined me on other podcasts, you know that I love discussing ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, because I definitely agree with the research which says that the more ACEs a child or teenager has, it increases the likelihood not only of developing a chronic illness, but also of having a mental illness or mental disorder. So I'm very pleased that today's guest is actually an expert in ACEs. So Susie Gruber is a personal development coach. She was a scientist turned personal development coach. How about that? And helps professionals get unstuck. By working with Susie, professionals can uncover and unravel what's driving their challenging patterns and self-critical mindset. Through this new sense of freedom, Susie's clients become more productive and successful and experiencing a greater sense of aliveness, ease, and joy. So as usual, we'll take a very quick commercial break, and when we return, it'll be my pleasure to introduce you to Susie Gruber. Stay tuned.
For more information about Tracey, her mission, the show, Tracey's book, and offered courses from Tracey herself, visit TraceyMaxfield.com. Be sure to catch the latest news on mental health and Tracey's guests on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. While you're visiting TraceyMaxfield.com, make sure to sign up for the free monthly newsletter. Keep track of Tracey with upcoming events, interviews, seasonal tips, and the latest articles on important mental health issues. Plus, when you subscribe, you'll get a copy of Tracey's booklet, Why Our Kids Are Suffering and How We Can Help Them. For more information and to sign up, go to TraceyMaxfield.com. Parents, do you worry about your children or teens? Do they have issues they don't talk to you about? Go to TraceyMaxfield.com to sign up for Tracey's informational courses. Tracey has brought connection to parents and teens all over the world. To learn more, visit TraceyMaxfield.com. A brighter future is possible.
So welcome back, everyone. And as promised, I would like to introduce you to my very special guest, Susie Gruber. Susie, thank you so much for being on my show.
My pleasure.
So in the intro, when I read your bio, I mentioned that you are an expert in ACEs. And certainly, as everyone knows, I always mention ACEs, I think, in every single podcast so far, because I don't think you can now have a conversation about chronic health, autoimmune disorders, or mental illness without looking at the connection between adverse childhood experiences. So tell me a little bit about the work that you do.
Yes, so I am a practitioner of the neuroaffective relational model, a model developed by Dr. Lawrence Heller to address the impact of ACEs on adults, and it's now being applied also with children. And what's exciting about NARM, which is what we call it for short, is that rather than give us another strategy for, oh, if I do this thing, I'll feel better for a few minutes or a few hours or a few days, we actually look at what's driving the difficulties that people are struggling with and help them unravel them so that they can actually have better lives rather than continuing to have to, meditate for an hour. Not that meditation is bad. I love meditation personally, but to keep adding strategy after strategy after strategy. Instead, we look at what's driving the difficulties that people end up with from ACEs.
No, I agree. And now, when I look back at my childhood and my teenage years, my score was 5. Yeah. And so, the fact that I then went on and had a number of depressive episodes until I was finally diagnosed with a genetic form of depression, I'm kind of looking at everything that's happened and saying to myself, how could it not have happened? Because it was not identified. And even though we think that we've, suppressed those memories and pushed it right down into a little box, you carry it with you.
That's right.
Throughout life. Right. And trauma and certain things that trigger kind of sets that wheel in motion.
Yes. And I want to speak to what you just said about how we put it in a little box. As children, that's all we can do because we don't have the literally the physical structures to process all that emotion, and often the people in our environment aren't interested in how we really feel about it. So we did that to survive, except that when we turn 18, it doesn't just simply go away.
That's right.
There's no magic that all of a sudden it's gone. So we carry the adaptations to those environments into our adulthood, and that's what creates so much of the difficulty so many of us struggle with.
Absolutely. Now, in your practice, obviously, you are helping adults that have ACEs. And so what are the most common, so ACEs are categorized into 10 sections. What are the most common ACEs that you see are actually contributing to the health problems that, they're now experiencing?
I would say that what I see most commonly is some form of emotional abuse.
Abuse, yes.
Yes, which can take on so many different forms. But the most common form I see is what we call misattunement, meaning that an adult had an idea about how a child should be or how a child should feel or whether or not a child was hungry or tired. And instead of actually getting curious and engaging with the child, they just behaved in a certain way that erased the child's needs and desires. And so that's a silent form. That misattunement is kind of a silent ACE that a lot of people who even had good childhoods on the surface, meaning they weren't physically or sexually abused, they weren't neglected, but that's a silent ACE that I see even with people who were physically and sexually abused. Of course, it's across the board, this theme of misattunement.
No, I actually agree with that. And it's funny because there's a saying, right? We all know it. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me. And it's like, okay, the person who wrote that, in my book, I actually said the person who wrote that must have been drunk or on drugs because, unless he was so self-actualized and had such a good sense of self-worth and confidence, it's actually impossible because we are a society that tend to dwell on negative comments and criticisms and overlook the positive. And I've said many times in my podcast, you can say 9 compliments, 9 wonderful things to somebody and 1 negative, and everyone will tend to dwell on the negative. And so, I mean, part of the aim of my podcast is to not only help, not that many children are watching it, but I know there is a teenage and a young adult audience, but to get parents to understand that when you invalidate your kids' emotions and feelings and what they're trying to tell you, that's not good.
No, it teaches the child to disconnect from their own internal state, which is the key. So if the parent says something to the child that invalidates that internal state, then that sets up this dynamic inside the child of like, wait, this parent that I love and need is telling me one thing and my internal state is telling me something else. So guess what? My internal state must be wrong, right? And that's how we decide we're bad, and a whole host of adaptations centered around inauthenticity is born from there.
No, you're absolutely right. And it was funny with my parents, very abusive. Initially, it was physical. And I'd always tell the story until I could run fast enough to get in my room and barricade the door. But then the emotional torture and the psychological words and the, what went on after that really did, I would say, a number on my brain.
Yes.
As you're trying to fight with that. And I knew at a very early age, I had to get away, that I knew that if I stayed in that environment, I would either become like them or I would eventually die. And hence why I'm in a different country. But not everyone has that ability or that the strength or the insight into doing it. And so what are what are the tips that you want to share with parents, teachers, adults? Because you could have wonderful parents that support you, and you could have a teacher that's a bully that's still going to have that same effect on your brain.
That's true. And again, that's why attunement is so important, that the more that parents can pay attention to what's actually going on in the child, the more comfortable the child's going to be expressing that, hey, this teacher's doing this thing to me and I know it's not right. If a parent is misattuning as well, the child's more likely, to minimize other bad things they're experiencing outside the home, and then they're not going to tell anybody, and that's an even worse cascade.
Yes.
And then we do that as adults. We get into abusive relationships, or we stay in a job too long where we're being mistreated, or we take things really personally that aren't ours. There's a whole host of ways that
I'm raising my hand.
Me too. Me too.
It is. And I mean, I've moved past that because of what happened to me. And I say it was, despite everything that happened, it was a gift, and it enabled me to heal and to work on myself and understand everything and move forward. And I'm hoping that, when parents or teachers tune in to the podcast and they're wanting to understand and learn more about what they can do to help kids, that maybe they'll recognize something in themselves, because I think the majority of the population are carrying something with them. And depending on our strengths and our previous coping abilities and the support system we have, we're all responding to it differently. But many parents model behavior that they have learned from their abusive childhoods. And we know that children mimic or copy their parents. I mean, so what you say, what you do, what you give out, you have a little sponge there that is just absorbing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if a parent is struggling with feeling unhappy or feeling depressed or feeling anxious, the child's inclination is going to be, how can I change this? What can I do to help? And that takes the child away from their own development.
Yes.
And so I always tell parents the most important thing you can do is do your own work. And I know it can be difficult, it can be humbling, and we can't change other people's behavior, but when we do our own work, all of our relationships change. And that's really exciting.
Definitely. So going back to teenagers, especially, I'd say in the past couple of years, there's been such a switch where we have the helicopter parents, and that is a challenge in itself. But we also now have parents, especially mums, who are becoming best friends with their teenage daughters and are socializing and partying and sharing an intimacy and an openness which I struggle with, because I believe you need to be a parent first and foremost. As you get older and your teenager becomes an adult, they can become your best friend at that point. But when they are starting to develop their own identity and learn who they are and their place in the world, you then jumping on board and being their best friend, I think is actually going to add more chaos in that child's brain. And I can see you nodding, you agree. So I'd love you to talk to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to the issue of confused roles. Is this person my mother or my best friend? And you know, in the teenage years, as you said, the teenager is individuating, and they still need the structure that parents provide. It's this funny in-between place. And so, yes, I really agree with what you're saying, that while on a certain level I appreciate the impulse of a parent to be the child's best friend, it's important to consider, what does this child actually need at that stage of development? And they still need a parent.
Absolutely. And also, once you become your child's best friend, you really can't be sharing personal information and challenges and problems you have with a boss or with your neighbor or best friend, because it amazes me, but there are still so many adults out there that don't understand that your child, your teenager, takes all this and wants to try and help you and wants to try and make it better. And you're putting such an enormous burden on their shoulders that is completely unnecessary.
And hurtful.
Yes.
You know, I think people underestimate or overestimate where an adolescent is in their development.
Yes.
The human brain keeps developing until age 25. So if someone is parentifying or in any way, you know, having expectations of an adolescent at 13, 14, 15, I mean, there's still 10 more years of physical development going on. And with it, the emotional development and the cognitive thinking that goes along with that development, is essential for the child to have the space to have that happen and not be expected to take on a role that's not theirs.
I 100% agree. And I feel so much for, we know there are so many families out there, especially if maybe it's a single parent family. And if the mum is working 2 jobs or is working nights, we are finding that the oldest child is now becoming the surrogate parent.
Yes.
And yes, we're giving them skills that they can use in later life, but we're not even allowing them now to be a teenager. We have robbed them of their childhood.
Not at all. I mean, my mother was in that. She was the oldest of 6 girls and was parentified from a very early age. And I can tell you that she never learned to be her own person, which then affected how she parented me. And it's so important to understand that this stuff is generational.
Yes.
And that's part of why it's so important for parents to look at their own stuff, is to break that cycle.
No, I agree, especially when all parents say, I don't want my child to go through what I went through, and I want to give them the best possible. And I think we've gone off track when we think that giving them materialistic things and, you know, the next iPad, the next iPhone, I want that $400 dress for prom, things like that. What the child or teenager really needs is your love and support and emotional connection of helping them develop values and the sense of right and wrong.
Yes. And who they most are. So, you know, if mom's an engineer and she decides that her child should be an engineer too, but the kid has more inclinations towards being artistic, you know, stuffing a child into, you know, round peg in a square hole is really, really destructive.
Yes. And I always find it so amazing. I think we're so confused as a world because in one hand, we are treating our children and our teenagers as if they are adults and are putting on them adult roles and expectations without even explaining to them what it means to be an adult and how you actually deal with that. And then on the other hand, we're then saying, oh, we're not going to tell you about that. Oh, be quiet. Oh, you're going to be fine. Oh, move on. It'll get better. Look at me. And it's like, I mean, I would hate to be a teenager growing up right now, because societal pressures and expectations are so absolutely overwhelming.
Yes. And the amount of input that is available to a child from a very early age now is astounding. I mean, when I was growing up, we had a telephone on the wall with no answering machine. Right now, we're all carrying around smartphones. We're available every moment of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Kids get phones really early. They can get on the internet and find whatever they want. I mean, the amount of input for a child to process is beyond what they are literally, physically, and emotionally capable of processing. It's completely overwhelming.
No, I agree. And as adults, we are overwhelmed. And, we also are trying to dissect fake news from factual information, and the cyberbullying as an adult. Yeah, Facebook, you just go on there. I did a post about it. It seems with the pandemic, we've seen that people have come out and shown their best self, and people have come out and shown their worst self. And just some of the horrible comments that I'm seeing on posts, even about healthcare professionals who are the frontline workers that are saving us. I'm like, as an adult, I'm like, oh my goodness, I know kids are experiencing the same. Maybe not like that, but they're still going through this attack on their person, their sense of self, who they are. And if we don't have adults that are, able to sit down and kind of help them explore their feelings and understanding that what they've just seen is wrong and how they can help process that, we're going to have some mixed up kids moving into adulthood, which is not good.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic provides an especially significant challenge for kids, because this is supposed to be a time when they're, exploring possibility and out appropriately into the world, and meeting and making connections with new people, and to have to contract into their family homes, which not in in healthy families, nothing wrong with that. In more difficult families, then their survival strategies are amped up even further. It's very, very complicated right now.
I know, and it's very sad, because both of us belong to an online ACEs group, and anyone who's listening, we'll put a link, but I encourage you to check it out, because the information they share is absolutely awesome. And Susie actually wrote an article on it last week, I think I read, which was great. And what they're saying is that already, because of this pandemic and the self-isolation and the social distancing, we can assume every child has one ACE score already because of this trauma. So to adults, to family members, to parents who are watching this, what kind of guidance can you offer them? So I know it's going to be different for children and different for teenagers, but let's begin. What can you guide them so they can kind of support their kids, their children at home right now?
I would say the most important thing is to help them feel connected. So, and that can look like, giving them space to express how they're feeling, getting really curious about their needs and desires, helping them find substitute resources for the things that they generally found pleasure in that they can no longer, or at least hopefully temporarily, not do. But really, if you're a parent who has a tendency not to want to sit with a child's feelings, finding it in yourself to tolerate the feelings in your child, which may bring up feelings in you, I think is super, super important. Because it's natural to have feelings of sadness and anger about what's going on, because our lives have been changed in ways that we can't control. None of us asked for this virus. We didn't create this. It's literally something that has come upon us, and and it has an undefined ending point. It's not like an earthquake that lasts, for a number of seconds and then it's over. There's a whole lot of uncertainty and not knowing. And so helping not just children, but all of our family members sit with the sense of helplessness and uncertainty that's going on, which is totally natural to be feeling right now.
And of course, when we then go to teenagers, it's slightly different, because we know that their peer support group, their relationships, and their social connection, this is what has kind of helped them go through their school years. Now all of a sudden they're separated from that. And I know I read there was a report from UNESCO, and they said that kids are feeling that they've become prisoners in their own home. And so this is the time when they are now, they think they're an adult, but they're trying to learn the skill set and the tools to develop their own sense of self. What would you not offer to the teenagers, but then also to the parents, those adult role models?
It's difficult with teenagers. Like when I in the neighborhood I live in, I'm seeing a couple teenagers who live here who are definitely not social distancing, and it's that place of immortality and imperviousness.
Yes.
So natural to the teenage years. And
yes.
And I think to some degree we have to accept that some kids are just going to behave that way, and we can do as much as we can to educate them, and then at some point we've done what we can. And it's tricky because they could potentially bring the virus into the home. And so do what you can to educate the children with simple information. I wouldn't overwhelm a child with, and certainly not a young child with specifics about the virus, but to really help them understand, hey, this is a serious thing. And at the same time, helping them brainstorm with options of how they can create the connection. So not just, no, you can't do this, but hey, let me help you figure out how you can do this in a way that's safer for the family and for you.
No, absolutely. And I mean, there are so many different strategies that we can use. It's funny because of all the teenagers that I've seen, when they're sitting together in groups, they're actually all on their phones. So, part of me is like, well, okay, so you're not having that physical connection of sitting next to them, but you can still connect with them. But I think it's as much as kids don't want to say that they want that physical connection and intimacy, I think they need to have that person in their personal space. Yes, I mean, it's safety, it's comforting, but also it's knowing that you have a physical being there who is your best bud, your friend. And as much as kids are like, I want to be alone, leave me alone, I'm going up to my room, I think what lots of adults are missing is, yes, they want to be alone from you. They want to go up to the room and talk to their friends. And when they're in school, they're not talking to their friends, they're communicating via phones, but they're all together and they need that tribe. It's like that they have their tribe.
Yeah, we're wired for social engagement. That's part of our brain chemistry. And
100%, yes.
Yeah, to have that altered so significantly is very difficult. I mean, I find personally, like, I'll go for a walk in the local park here, and I like just even walking past people. I live by myself, so to have that, even just that level of social engagement of walking by strangers and saying hello, I can feel it doing something in my brain that's really important.
Absolutely. And as you've said, there is so much uncertainty here. Each country is responding differently, and of course this podcast is global. I know New Zealand has handled it extremely well, and they are almost ready to return to normal life. The UK is in the midst of chaos right now. The States, again, a little chaotic, because one minute they say, everything's going to end May 1st, then the next thing, no, we're extending it another month. And people, I think, because we're not giving them that date, that tangible, on this day, everything will end and you will be okay. We're not giving them that. And I think that's where there's all this unrest and chaos, because they don't know their future. In Canada, we're told more specific information. We also don't have the density of population, obviously, that's in the States. But in Canada, we're a little bit, we've always been known as the pacifist country, but I think we're a little bit more, okay, we're fine, we get it, we know we're moving towards something, because there's so many states and there's so many, like New York, Florida, Louisiana, California being hit, Washington being hit so hard. And then maybe you have Kansas, where my friends are, that's a little bit more, okay, we haven't got much go. You know, we got it here, but it's not significant. And it's difficult for people to see the big picture.
I agree with what you're saying completely. It's so dependent on the nature of where you live. There's such a difference between an urban area where the density of population makes spreading this thing much more likely versus, you know, a more rural area where you just don't come in contact with that many people. I mean,
right.
Someone in New York comes in contact with more people in a single subway car than the average rural person comes in contact with in an entire day.
Absolutely. And hence why they have more people infected and a higher death toll. And it's funny because Florida reopened their beaches at 5 o'clock on Friday and people flocked. And it shows that, you know, it comes to a point with people, it's just that need to be outdoors and to be socially connected is a chance they're willing to take against the virus. And I think I'm hoping that this is going to change how we act in society, how we respond to things. That is my hope. Deep down, I'm thinking maybe it won't happen, but we've proven as a society, we need people. We need togetherness, we need connection, and I'm hoping we will build on that in a positive way.
I completely agree. That's my deep hope too, is that this pandemic provides an opportunity for people to really get curious about how they relate to each other and take some steps to improve that so that they can feel more connected and less distanced. And also that we really acknowledge our own humanity. I think that because the virus is truly a life threat, it gives us an opportunity to build a relationship with our own mortality in a way that our culture has fundamentally avoided until now.
I agree. It's when there's that possibility of death. And as a nurse, I saw it all the time. And so you're continually reflecting. But it's to look at the big picture and say, what is important to me in the whole scheme of things? What is the most important to me and gives me joy and peace in my life? So, I mean, we can't, it's unavoidable. We cannot not stop talking about the pandemic. I think also what we're seeing is a lot of adults have come out and said they're really struggling. And I know for many who already have a pre-existing health condition or a mental illness, this is a really tough time, and I know that there's lots of supports that have been brought out to kind of help them, but I foresee that once all this is passed, we're going to go into a different kind of pandemic, not the bacterial or the viral. I think we're going to have so many people that are going to be emotionally and psychologically exhausted, confused, and I think that we're not going to be able to pick up the pieces and go on with what we consider our life once all this is over because of what's going on. So this is what you do. You're helping adults who already have ACEs, so they're coming to you because they have things going on in their life. Now we're adding this into the equation. And so what guidance can you offer them?
Well, the way I like to think about it is that for most of us, I mean, this is a very serious issue, and there are many people facing very real acute things like job loss and having to live with multiple generations of family members that they didn't anticipate that happening. And in my experience, what that does is it amplifies our survival strategies, the strategies that we created, to survive less than ideal environments in childhood, the environments that created ACEs. And so the quote good news is that it amplifies something that was already there. And so if anything, it gives people a way to see even more clearly, oh, when I'm stressed, for example, my go-to is to please other people, or my go-to is to want to end everybody's suffering, or my go-to is to isolate. And so they're getting a really, and we are, because I'm in that just like everybody else, we're getting a really strong look at, okay, well, what's my go-to strategy? And it makes it a little bit easier to find the starting point of how to get help, of, oh, this is what I'm doing to myself, let's unravel this.
Yes,
and so that's a positive from my perspective. And as I said, it's my hope that this will encourage people to get help in a way they might not have before, because it's providing a little extra motivation, because our lives aren't going to go back to the way they were. No. There's going to be a normal. And the more we look at our own stuff, the more likely we can feel like we're like we have choices in what that new normal becomes, rather than, oh God, I'm just being swept along by this tsunami called the pandemic. And I think that's really important, especially if we have families.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm talking all the time about, even though some people are in very, very dire straits. You just see the lineups for them going to the food bank and things. And other people, they still have a paycheck and they still have their benefits, and things are not as bad. That doesn't take away how they are internalizing it and dealing with it, because we're all very, very different. But I think even in the midst of everything that's going on, trying to reframe it as, okay, so I have this free time on my hands. I cannot go anywhere. How can I best use my abilities? And I believe everyone has gifts, and some people don't draw on their gifts. And I think this is actually a really good opportunity for people to kind of maybe pull on the gifts or what they've always wanted to do. And I know people may be watching this going, I'm just about able to get up in the morning and I have no money and, I don't know what to do. I was there when I was in the midst of my rabbit hole depression and dealing with suicide. And it's try to reframe it that what is good in your life, or what is good out there that you can draw on and help you get through that day. And it may be, oh, I've always wanted to plant a garden, or I've always wanted to see the Louvre Museum, and now everything is online and they're giving you absolutely free tours of different places. It's kind of going into that space and trying to get joy from that, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
I do. And, I think it's important for people to make the distinction between the difficulty that the pandemic brings, the real difficulties, versus what we do to ourselves as a result of that difficulty.
Yes.
So if I take this difficulty of the pandemic and it touches my old belief of, oh, it's hopeless, I can't make my life better, it's going to amplify everything.
Yes.
So if we can really start to tease apart that negative self-talk and realize, okay, well, there's a really horrible thing happening. That is for real. But I'm throwing gasoline on my own internal fire and making it worse.
Yes.
Getting curious about why I'm doing that and how I'm doing that. And then, as you said, okay, well, there's this other impulse in there. It's like my true impulse, as you were saying, is to go plant a garden. I mean, that personally has been one of my biggest respites during all of this, is to have my hands in the soil. But everybody's got a different impulse.
Yes.
Like, oh,
Yes.
maybe I've wanted to do an online dance class, or, I have friends that are playing games on Zoom, finding different and novel ways to connect. But, I heard an interview on the Transforming Trauma podcast recently. Larry Heller was talking to Gabor Mate, and Gabor Mate said, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. And I love
agree.
that distinction. It's like, instead of focusing on the event of the pandemic, looking inside, oh, what am I making that mean? Yes. What am I telling myself?
I agree. No, and I love that. And it is very true. It's, we have to reframe it and look at this as an opportunity that we can discover our real selves. If you say, when you were working, and we always say, everyone says, if I had more time, I would do this. Well, now you have that opportunity. And if it's, okay, I want to travel more, then try and look at how can you travel more from the confines of your living room and a computer. But, it's the little things. It may not be perfect and ideal, but we're having to make adaptations throughout life right now. Right? There is no straight road. It's very curvy and there's bumps along the way. And it's just learning to accommodate those and still being the best that you can be. And so even if it is going and cleaning your basement and painting it, go do it. Even if it's just like a little bit today and then a little bit tomorrow, but it gives you that sense of purpose and gives you, and I like that if people start doing things that give them joy, it enables you to take back control of your life a little bit, because you have that certain percentage that you cannot change because you have no control.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I think you just hit on a really important point, is to honor where we are truly helpless. Like, I can't go outside and wave a wand and stop the pandemic, and that's important to acknowledge and be clear about. But there's a lot of other stuff I can do, yes. Whether it is clean my basement or jump on an online free class to retrain myself in something that I've always wanted to learn. It's like, where is the open space versus where am I truly helpless, and how do I navigate this uncertainty? If there's fear, well, what's the worst thing I can imagine happening? Really getting in the here and now, because yes. What happens is, when we have ACEs and there's something this significant going on for us in the present as adults, we unconsciously associate those two things, and they're not the same. Right. We're not trapped like we were when we were children. We're not helpless like we were when we were children. And those can get enmeshed in a way that we have to consciously remind ourselves, oh, wait a minute, I'm not 5.
I love that. Absolutely love that. So it's time to wrap up, and it's gone very quickly. So I think maybe when the pandemic is over, I need to have you back on, because then we will have a clearer picture of what the future looks like. And there's still so many people that are going to, and kids and teenagers that are going to need help, because school, in Canada and in Britain, they're saying school may be comprised of very small numbers in class at different times of the week. And I think that in itself may impact many kids significantly if their friends are not in that particular class. So I think that's a whole new topic to talk about. So in closing, I'd like you to share your personal thoughts and your wisdom on how today and tomorrow, in the midst of everything that's going on, people can move forward and be their best selves.
Be kind to yourself.
Yes.
Really attune to yourself and be kind to yourself, and just pause. Take a few moments and just pause here and there throughout the day and listen deeply to what you're experiencing inside yourself. And if it feels scary, see if you can tolerate it just for an instant and give it a little bit of space. It's a tremendous practice of undoing old hurts.
Yes.
and opening to allowing yourself to be curious and surprised by who you find there.
I love it. I love it. Susie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved talking to you. And as I said, you need to come back for part 2.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Susie Gruber is a scientist turned personal development coach. Her deepest passion lies in helping you improve your life today. She received her undergraduate and graduate degree in chemistry at Harvey Mudd College and then Princeton University, spending 15 years in the biotechnology industry working in operations for startup companies. While learning about peak oil, environmental issues, and the instabilities of our economic system, she learned how to listen to her deeper voice. And now she uses those tools and resources to help professionals get unstuck. By working with Susie, you get to uncover and unravel what's driving your challenging patterns and self-critical mindset, rather than adding yet another self-help to your to-do list. Through this new sense of freedom, Susie's clients become more productive and successful, experiencing a greater sense of aliveness, ease, and joy. Visit her online at susiegruber.com. Also check out her social media at facebook.com/Susie Gruber Personal Development Coach and on LinkedIn at Susie Gruber.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Susie Gruber. Some great information, not only to help our children, teenagers, and young adults, but also to help ourselves. And hopefully, this experience in the pandemic will help us become better people. So this wraps up another episode of Engage, Educate, and Empower. I hope you stay safe and well during this uncertain time. And please join me again next Thursday for another episode. Have a good week.